The views and opinions expressed in The Fact Is with Hollis Grant are those of Hollis Grant and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Droids Canada Network. Droids Canada Network does not take responsibility for any content or position produced by Hollis Grant and his show. Listener discretion is advised.
The topics discussed on today's episode are serious in nature. If anyone out there is suffering from any type of depression or has suicidal thoughts, we strongly recommend you seek professional help, speak with friends, family, speak to church clergy, seek help. I'd like to thank you for tuning in to another edition of The Fact Is. I'm your host, Hollis Grant. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about medical-assisted suicide. And the reason why that we're going to be talking about medical-assisted suicide, not because the time of the year where suicide rates are much higher in the winter, much higher after Christmas, and during the holiday season as well. We're not talking about it because of it being a national mental health day. We're talking about it because in Canada, one of the telecommunication companies, Bell, does a promotion every year where they talk about mental health and they talk about suicide. They say if you have mental health issues, go talk to somebody, seek professional help. Don't give up. Keep fighting. You're worth fighting for. People do love you. People do care about you. No mistake is worth killing yourself over. All great messages. You won't hear me say no to that message. Now, a listener of the show reached out to us. And they reached out over their Twitter being blocked. And the reason why that it was blocked or the account was locked out was over a post that was made on Bell's National Let's Talk Day. Hashtag Let's Talk. And it was in response to Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland, who is on the board of directors of the World Economic Forum. Chrystia Freeland, that grandparents were Nazis. Chrystia Freeland, that supports Ukraine but does not support an ongoing attempt for a peace deal. Chrystia Freeland, that was photographed with fundamentalist groups wearing questionable articles of clothing, supporting a belief system that believes in race superiority. Well, Chrystia Freeland wrote out and said, if you have mental health issues, reach out and seek a professional. Now, the listener went on to comment to say something along the lines of, go seek professional help. Go talk to your doctor about suicide. And if you have mental health issues, go kill yourself. Now, the account was blocked. But let's take a look at a particular article published on January 23rd, 2023, CTV News, Canadian Television News, a private corporation, but does accept the government bribe money coming in to publish positive government messaging. Now, the headline is 9 Things to Know About Medical Assistance in Dying for Mental Illness. Medical correspondent Avis Favreau and W5 producer Kevin O'Keefe worked on this story. In Canada, medical-assisted dying, (MAID), is changing. In 2023, people who have a mental disorder as their sole underlying medical condition will become eligible for assisted death. Originally, that was scheduled to happen on March 17th, but the government has asked for a delay. Here are 9 things you need to know. Number 1, it is part of the changes to the MAID law, medical assisted assistance in dying. That began in 2021. 2021, that was under the Liberal government. So the Liberals wanted to push this through. They have a minority government, so that means they were supported by the New Democratic Party, another left leaning organization. In March 2021, the law changed to include people with physical conditions like chronic pain who weren't actually dying. In other words, their death wasn't reasonably foreseeable. Psychiatric illnesses, which some say can be serious and incurable, were excluded for 2 years, while federal officials studied how to safely include them along with physical illness. A special federal joint committee was set up to study assisted dying, including how MAID could be provided to people with mental disorders. A final report from the Joint Committee was due in October of 2022. An expert panel studying assisted suicide for mental illness also issued a report with their recommendations. Like physical illness, a person asking for assisted suicide, state-sponsored suicide, must be found by assessors to have a grievous and irredeemable medical condition, meaning a serious and incurable illness, disease, or disability in an advanced state of irreversible decline with intolerable suffering. In countries like Belgium and the Netherlands, which have allowed assisted dying for mental disorders for 2 decades, requests are made by people suffering from a variety of psychiatric conditions, including depression and other mood disorders, PTSD, schizophrenia, psychotic disorders, neurodevelopmental disorders like autism, and personality disorders like borderline personality disorder. It's worth noting that, meanwhile, in the Netherlands, the place that was always free for drugs, they've started to crack down on the usage of hash because they found studies that hash isn't really the best thing for the human brain, so they're starting to crack down on that. But it goes to show you that, and if we look at the history of COVID as studied on this podcast, if you go back to droidscanada.com, go listen back to those as we covered the pandemic happening, the science can be wrong. And sometimes these academics get things wrong. So could it be because they've been proven wrong with the mask wearing reduces and prevents the spread? Remember, put a mask on, you won't get COVID. Remember, get this vaccine, you won't get COVID. To drugs are okay, hash is okay, don't worry, it's fine. Make a mistake. Is it possible that we could say that these same medical doctors that screwed up multiple times could get it wrong? But when it comes down to killing somebody, that life is over. There's no coming back from that. Number 3, defining an incurable mental illness isn't always easy. People who ask for state-assisted suicide for mental disorder will be assessed on a case-by-case basis to determine if the person's disorder is grievous. In countries with psychiatric euthanasia laws, that usually requires proof that the patient has had an extensive history of trying therapies that didn't work. A second assessor must agree. The expert panel recommends that one of the assessors be a psychiatrist, independent of the person's medical team, and an expert in the mental disorder that the patient has been diagnosed with. So for the article and the people that write the article to do the research and to look in to go, well, countries that do this, the Netherlands, it's okay, it's fine. In Belgium, it's fine. They have a mental health issue, it's okay. It's perfectly okay. There's multiple layers to have somebody looked at, and so we won't rush through the system. But if you remember, when they rolled out state-sponsored suicide, it was always under the notion that this is only going to be for people with terminal illness, people that are stage 4 cancer, and you're on the death's door. That's it. Those are the people that we're looking at. Now, after a few years, it's all of a sudden turned into, well, if you have a mental illness, Yeah, it's okay. It'll be okay. But don't worry. You have to have multiple doctors look at you before they'll sign off and you know, rush you out and kill you. But yet, this government still wants to change the wait time so that you can go in and see a doctor and in the same day have your appointment to die. Number 4, as with all forms of medically assisted death, the patient's doctor, psychiatrist, or family don't have to be a part of the decision and may not know about state sponsored suicide until after the person has died. Physicians and families are never allowed to speak with each other if a capable person asks them not to, whether it's about state sponsored suicide or any other healthcare practice. According to the expert panel recommendations, assessors should try to obtain input from other sources, including the patient's physician and family. However, if the patient asks the assessors not to contact family or their mental health practitioners, they are required to respect the patient's wishes. If the assessor determines that they cannot do a proper assessment without the family or another doctor's involvement, then the patient can be turned down for medical state-sponsored suicide. Now, keep in mind, we've gone over the Sunshine List. We've talked about the Sunshine List. And in the Sunshine List is the highest paid people, uh, government employees. And in there, you'll always see doctors, and doctors always make rank high on that list, but you'll also find the scandalous doctors, the ones that just rush a patient through, make up a patient, or double book patients, or take on too many patients, and you're left sitting there in the waiting room, waiting and waiting and waiting 4 hours before your doctor sees you. Because why does the doctor do that? Because every billable person that comes in, they get a check from OHIP. So the more people they see, the bigger their paycheck is. So why would a doctor want to take their time? And we've heard cases. Last year in 2022, 10,000 people, 10,000 Canadians chose state-sponsored suicide. So we know that that's a large number. That's a very large number. That's a small town being eradicated by the government. So we know that doctors are fraudulent. What makes you think that they'll follow these rules? I'm not saying all doctors, but there will be a few that will overlook these rules. Number 5, additional mental health treatments can be recommended before state-sponsored suicide approval, but the patient can also say no to any additional therapy. The expert panel on state-sponsored suicide for mental illness recommends that MAID assessors should ensure that people have had an extensive treatment history and access to appropriate care. The legislative safeguards, that's code for the government, also say that a patient must have seriously considered additional treatment. However, under Canadian law, no one can be forced to undergo a treatment they don't want unless it's COVID, vaccinations, and then we'll freeze your bank accounts. And if you protest, then we'll shut your bank accounts down. And if you have, what was the term that the Prime Minister of Canada had? Unacceptable views. That's the government. That's the one that's safeguarding you. When the leader of the party says if you have unacceptable views. Refusing treatment does not mean that a person has automatic access to state-sponsored suicide. Number 6, people can have a medically assisted death even while they're waiting for treatment. This point has caused a lot of controversy in Canada. Some doctors argue that a patient must have access to the fullest possible range of treatment, including social supports like housing, before becoming eligible for state-sponsored suicide. They say that if someone is waiting for treatment, it means the person doesn't have an incurable illness because they haven't tried everything to get better. However, others argue that just because a person is waiting for treatment doesn't mean their illness is incurable. They say people can wait for treatment that are unlikely to improve their condition. So why have them around? Just let them go early. And these are the decision makers. Now, by this time, you might be saying, well, hold on here, Hollis, hold on, you're out of line. You're calling this MAID, medical aided assisted dying, state-sponsored suicide, There is an issue with the word MAID. And when you make the acronym, then it's capital M, capital A, small I, and capital D. Well, what is MAID? A maid is, by definition, a female domestic servant. Also, a girl or a young woman, especially an unmarried one, or a virgin. Now, what's the definition of a servant? A servant is a person who performs duties for others, especially a person employed in the house on domestic duties or as a personal attendant. Someone that's serving someone, that looks after, cares for them. They're a maid. They help you. They're here to help. So why does the government have to use an acronym to say, we're here to help you by killing you? They pick the wrong acronym. They use the wrong words because the messaging in that word of maid, someone is there to help you. A woman, a young woman, someone that's nurturing that will look after you is really the government waiting to kill you. It reminds me of a time, and a listener once told me the story where they were sitting in a room at work and they were coming up with new ways to engage people in the call center. And it came around to say, well, what can we do? And said, well, let's put all our corporate buzzwords in together and make a really flashy statement. Service, honesty, integrity, and teamwork. And that's what we'll use. Service, honesty, integrity, and teamwork. That should be our 4 words that go together and be the meaning and the glue and the foundation of this call center. Well, if you put them together with those first letters of the word, service, honesty, integrity, and teamwork, it spells out shit. Is this what the government has come down to? This is what the bureaucrats, these are unelected government officials, that they're so blind to see what they spell out that they would approve the word shit and accept it by coming up with the term maid. Number 7, some doctors are calling it state-sanctioned suicide. Doctors disagree on whether it is possible to reliably distinguish between a person who is requesting maid because they're suicidal and one who is requesting maid after serious consideration. Some psychiatrists argue that patients must request maid when they're suicidal, and therefore doctors should never help a mentally ill person end their life. Number 8, some experts believe the number of state-sponsored suicide deaths among those with mental disorders is unlikely to be low, while others believe it will be high. Data from some European countries show that only 1 to 3% of deaths from euthanasia are among those with mental disorders. Reports from the Netherlands show only 5% of requests made by persons with mental illnesses are granted. The vast majority are rejected. Critics say that in Canada, the number of mentally ill people that will die by state-sponsored suicide will be high because our legislative safeguards will be less restrictive. They argue that Europe requires patients to try certain treatments, and they have better access to mental health services. Number 9, in the past, mental illnesses haven't prevented a person from accessing assisted dying. Since assisted dying first became legal in Canada in 2016 under the Liberal government, a person with a mental disorder could still qualify for state-sponsored suicide, provided they have had a physical illness that made them eligible. For example, a person with terminal cancer may suffer from depression, or a person with chronic pain may have anxiety. As long as the patient had a physical illness that met with the eligibility criteria, they could qualify for assisted dying. In 2023, people will no longer have to have a physical illness to qualify. They could be eligible solely because of their mental illness. You have anxiety? Sit down in this chair. Let's give you an injection. Oh, you're suffering from depression. Sit down here. Let's give you a little bit of an injection. Now, Do you think that our listener crossed a line when they pointed out the hypocrisy from the Liberal government, the one that allowed suicide, that allowed state-sponsored suicide and allowed it to grow, and now to push over to mental illness? Is that person over the line? So when you now have a company that's reaching up for, Bell, let's talk about mental disorder. Well, let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. Because if you have a mental disorder, maybe your best option is to go talk to your doctor to go kill yourself. And yet the government has the audacity to say, we care about you. We care. Go talk to somebody. We're here for you. I'd like to thank you for tuning in this week to The Fact Is. I'm your host, Hollis Grant. I hope you have a wonderful week and enjoy the last remaining weeks of winter. Thanks for listening. Hi, this is Hollis Grant, host of The Fact Is. You can find us Wednesdays on droidscanada.com, where we discuss current affairs from around the world.